If you hunt enough, you learn the truth. What you seek speaks a language and knows it well. That's why every Primo's call for everything you hunt is made the right way. We sweat every detail so you get more out of every hunt, and nothing leaves our hand until we know it'll work in yours. Because we don't just make the world's best calls, we speak the language. Primos.
Knives, machetes, saws, and shears, multi-tools, shovels, swords, axes, spears, hatchets, and tomahawks. If it cuts, snips, slices, or chops, Midway USA has it. Find great gift ideas in our huge selection of pocket knives and other everyday carry folding knives. Make a statement or create a family legacy with one of our top-of-the-line hunting knives. We've got a great selection of manual and electric sharpeners too. For just about everything for the outdoors, check out midwayusa.com.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This is the 292nd episode of the podcast, and we are wading back into the gentle waters of the Cast1 series here on the podcast. What is that, you may ask? Well, it is essentially an opportunity to revisit the most fundamental and basic aspects of fly fishing. There was a 8 or 9 run of episodes of the Cast1 series about a couple of months ago, and they focused on everything from what is fly fishing to what are the essential pieces of gear that you need, to how to find fish, to what's the difference between seasons, to what might you need if you're going from trout to bass. And they served a number of purposes. One of them would be simply introductory information. If you are just getting into fly fishing, this would be the kind of thing that you could use, because I'm doing my best to not use technical language. I'm doing my best to stick at like 101 level information, but of course giving you reference to that 201 or that advanced information, because certainly a lot of these things, if you have any experience with the outdoors, should come relatively quickly to you. So it's been beneficial for that purpose. But it's also been beneficial for those who have spent a lot of time in fly fishing, and maybe they know 95% of something, but they have a low stave for the other 5%. What do I mean by that? Well, think of a barrel. If how much water can a barrel hold? Well, it can only hold as much as its lowest stave. It's the lowest part of it. And at that point, things start to not work as well. And 95% is pretty good. You can be pretty functional in fly fishing with 95%. But that other 5%, if you can get that up, then it will raise the water across the entire surface of your barrel. And so it's been helpful for folks in that way. But additionally, and this is the thing that's been most exciting for me, is it's helped give people who are helping other people language to use to articulate how to go fly fishing, what it means to go fly fishing, and even just to be able to explain some of the most rudimentary concepts of fly fishing. So today what we're talking about is something that has probably gotten more digital ink and more airwaves here on Casting across the years and years of the podcast and the website, and that is small stream fly fishing. Fly rods probably have a second position in that, but it's probably a distant second compared to small stream fly fishing. So what do I mean by small stream fly fishing? Well, if you've ever been driving in the mountains, or you've ever been just driving through the countryside, or maybe even through a city, and you see a small stream, it may only be as big as a large culvert. It may be a trickle in the summertime, or it might be a small stream that's cascading over rocks up high in the mountains. That's what I'm talking about. And yes, there are fish there. I can remember the very first time that I set my eyes on a river like this. I was involved with Trout Unlimited when I was a teenager, and I went with a buddy of mine and a gentleman who was taking us and some other new anglers fishing up in the mountains in Virginia. And we pulled out onto this road, and the stream seemed small, and we kept going upstream and upstream, further into the hollow, further up into the mountains, and the stream kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I was expecting it to open up into another river, somehow defying the odds of how watershed work. But no, we stayed next to this little creek, parked, got out, and my buddy and I asked, "Is this where we're fishing?" And he said, "Absolutely." And the pools were relatively small, the size of maybe a residential bathroom. The creek was maybe 10 to 15 feet wide at its widest points, and it was plunging down this hillside. There's small waterfalls, and we thought, what are we going to catch in a river like this? This is not what we were expecting. Before this point, we'd only fished in medium-sized trout streams, places where you had room to cast. You could wade out into the middle and fish the opposite bank. Here, you didn't even need to get in the water because it was so small. But what we saw happen over those next few minutes as he showed what it looked like to sneak up on hands and knees or creep around a stone or a tree trunk to make a delicate cast, or even a bow and arrow cast, which is a certain type of flicking of the fly rod, to plop that little fly at the head of that waterfall and watch it dance across the face of that pool for a small brook trout, 6 or 7 inches, to come up and nail it. And then you play that fish in, you admire its beauty, you let it go, and you hop up to the next pool and you do it again. It opened my eyes to what fly fishing could be in a brand new way. And really, since that day, small stream fly fishing has held probably top billing in my heart. I absolutely love Spring Creek fly fishing, and sometimes those things overlap. There's a Venn diagram middle portion of spring creeks and small streams, but I would have to say that small stream fly fishing is my preferred way to fish, just because it encompasses so many other aspects of the outdoors that I love. Usually it involves being remote, it involves hiking, it involves seeing so much stuff that you don't necessarily see when you're on that manicured path and when you're with a lot of people. I actually have incorporated other aspects of being in the outdoors, whether it be camping or trail running or just so many other things that you can do when you get off the beaten path and deep into the woods. Are you catching those 16, 18, 20-inch fish? No. I mean, if you do, that would be pretty remarkable. But, the 12 inches are the trophies. Sometimes, some streams, the 8 inches are the trophies. And it becomes more about the experience than it does about the reward. The reward shifts because the frame of reference shifts. I mean, this would be like if you went to Kamchatka, you would not be excited about a 16-inch rainbow trout. If you go all the way to Chile, you're not going to be happy catching a dozen 12-inch fish. But when you are in these environments and you appreciate what those 12-inch fish or those 10-inch fish mean in that niche and what it takes to actually find those fish, either find a stream that other people aren't fishing or find a stream that is something special, a diamond in the rough, as it were, then you can appreciate what it means to get into those fish. So that's kind of the ethos and the aesthetic about why this kind of fishing is so exciting. It's the exploration, it's the hiking, it's being remote, it's finding things that maybe somebody else hasn't found, and it's understanding that there's a sense of degree of, maybe anyone can catch those 6-inch fish, but you have found a way to get into those 8 and those 9-inch fish. And they are more often than not beautiful because this is where you're going to find your way into those native fish. Or if you're in a situation where there's, maybe brook trout out west or rainbows and browns here in the east have been stocked generations ago, but they haven't been stocked because of some revamped, maybe a little bit wiser environmental policy. The fish that are there aren't going to be these silver dumb fish. They're going to be well-proportioned, well-fed, well-colored fish. And here's the big trigger warning for some people. A lot of times, fisheries like this are the kind of fisheries where you can probably harvest a few fish and have a nice little streamside lunch. But of course, check your local regulations and understand what's going on around you when you do that. But enough about the aesthetics, although we could talk about this ad nauseum. First of all, how do you find waters like this? Well, there's a very good chance if you know of a fishery that is productive. You've talked to your local fly shop, you've read a guidebook, you've watched a video on YouTube, and Fishery X, River X in the valley is productive, then those feeder creeks that feed into it are probably going to be productive also. And there you have the benefit of, one, the fact that fish know how to move from the main river into the tributaries, and two, the majority of people are probably going to be fishing the main river and eschewing the tributaries for a little bit of a more open experience. So that's one way to find it. Another way to find it is if you find out that one small stream in a valley is a good fishing opportunity, then all you got to do is look the next valley over, and if there's a similar stream that's like it, it's worth exploring. You have places in the national forests and out here on the East Coast. I'm thinking of like the George Washington National Forest in Virginia and West Virginia, the White Mountain National Forest up in New Hampshire, all the way down to the Great Smoky Mountains and the area around there. All of those rivers, there's a very good chance that there's going to be some level of productivity. I've had the same experience out west where I don't find a river that I can trace to a guidebook saying there's going to be cutthroat trout here, or there's going to be brook trout here. I just know that in these kinds of environments, there's a very good chance that once you get away from the roads, get up into some elevation, you're going to find fish. And some of that, there's a prospecting aspect to it that you will begin to develop. But the best way to do that is either go with somebody who knows already or just get out and do it. Now, once you're there, what do you do? Well, you have the benefit, and this is a little bit of a gross over-exaggeration, but these fish are more often than not very opportunistic feeders. So although there are a lot of food sources up in these high mountain streams, they don't have that same sort of carrying capacity for bugs, of biodiversity that maybe a large river does. Recently, I was waist deep in a very big river, and any 1 square foot of surface flowing past me at any point in time had 5 or 6 different species of bugs floating on it. You're not going to necessarily get that in these small mountain streams. So consequently, these fish are going to be opportunistic feeders. They live in a real sense on a razor's edge. Something like drought, something like flooding, something like high temperatures can really do a number on them. So they are designed to take advantage of those opportunities that are in front of them. That is a wonderful opportunity for the angler because it doesn't mean that you need to necessarily match the hatch. And this is why this kind of angling is such a great way for the new angler to begin to build up confidence for casting to specific spots, to hooking fish, and to playing fish. Because I will, more often than not, start off with a dry fly, a big bushy dry fly. It could be a humpy, which is my absolute favorite. It could be a small stimulator. It could be a foam ant. It could be a parachute Adams. Any of these normal basic flies. And you know what? If you are the new angler that got that fly assortment and there's some weird stuff in there, there's the renegade, there's a thing that looks like a bee, there's some just bizarre flies. This is the place to fish those flies. And I like to start with a dry fly because there is a very good opportunity that these fish are going to want to play ball. The very first days of the season and the very last day of the season, from all the way up into Maine, all the way down to South Carolina, I've enjoyed success fishing dry flies for these mountain brook trout. They're more than willing to be active participants in whatever type of angling you want to engage in. And so this is the one of the great benefits of fishing these small mountain streams is you're able to fish dry flies. And that is an incredibly rewarding experience for the new angler because you get to see it all happen. You get to understand drift. You get to watch current. There's so many things that you're going to pick up by osmosis as you are fishing dry flies on small mountain streams, understanding how that fly, that leader, and that fly line work. And it's almost exaggerated a little bit because oftentimes in these small streams, the currents are so varied because when you have a smaller body of water, there's less of an opportunity for those currents to establish a more standard or streamlined trajectory. Things are going to swirl more. Things are going to drop off fast if you're at the bottom of a pool. So you are going to have to pay attention to some of those aspects that you might not have to pay attention to if you're in a larger body of water. But seeing those things, compensating for those things, learning how to mend, how to move your fly line with your rod tip or with your line hand, those are going to translate into all of your angling. But you then also have the benefit of those fish, again, being opportunistic. So if that fly drags a little bit, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to snub it like a fish that is wizened from a tailwater full of fish flies may be. So from a fly perspective, that is my go-to. That doesn't mean I don't carry nymphs, subsurface flies. Doesn't mean I don't carry streamers, flies that are meant to imitate fish or other larger foodstuffs. And there's times where I will employ those things, those deep, dark, green, black, and blue pools. I will absolutely toss a streamer in those, allow it to sink down, and then give it a nice, slow retrieve. And that's where probably that 9 out of 10 of the biggest fish I've caught in small mountain streams have come with probing the depths of these pools. These fish did not get to be the biggest fish because they are dumb. They stay out of sight, away from raccoons, away from raptors, and away from people. And so getting down in a place where they feel like they have a sense of security and that food source, that little woolly bugger or that little Mickey fin or whatever it may be, that looks like a high calorie intake for a low calorie expenditure is a great option for them. So that is kind of like my 1-2 punch. Dry fly and streamer. Doesn't mean you can't fish nymphs, doesn't mean you can't fish other types of flies, but that is generally the way I like to fish. And those are both great ways to fish for a new angler because, again, 1, you can watch the dry fly, and 2, you have a nice contact with that streamer as you're pulling it through the water. It is a direct contact between your rod tip, your line, your leader, and your fly, so you're going to be able to detect those strikes. So that's a word on the flies. Now, we're going to talk about rods. I'm going to do my absolute best to keep this relatively short. Because if you want to know more about my opinions on small stream fly rods, then the most popular page on cascading.com for years and years and years is called Small Stream Fly Rods. And there's a link to an article, there's a link to another podcast episode, and there's about 5 or 6 fly rod recommendations on that page. But I like fishing short fly rods of moderate weight. Now, I have those 1 weights and 2 weights, and I enjoy fishing them. I feel kind of limited to fishing dry flies with those, but the 3s and the 4s and maybe even short 5 weights can accommodate any and all flies that you would be fishing to these type of trout, whether it be a small dry fly or whether it be a bead head streamer, even if it's smaller in that size 10 to 12 range. And I also like to have a rod that's a little bit shorter. Now, there's been plenty of small streams, East Coast and West Coast, where I've had all the room in the world to cast, whether it be in the mountains or whether it be in some of these meadows that are kind of in the valleys. And there, having a 9-foot fly rod wouldn't be a problem. But my preference for situations where you get into tight conditions, and they could be tight because of overhanging branches, tunnels of rhododendron bushes, or even because the stream is narrow. You might not want a 9-foot fly rod if you are fishing on a stream that's only maybe 5 or 6 feet wide. I encountered that on a meadow in Colorado a handful of years ago, where I brought an 8.5-foot fly rod because I thought, you know what, these rivers can be wide open, there's no problem. But having that longer fly rod meant that I had to be much further away from the stream than I wanted to be. I had perfect cover because of the high grasses, but because I had a long fly rod, I had to stay far away from the creek to make my presentations. So in that situation, a sub 8-foot fly rod would have been better. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages to having a short fly rod. For one, it's not going to be that all-purpose fly rod. Now, I say that, but I kind of want to double back on that because I fished a 7-foot 3-weight almost exclusively for a number of years on all kinds of water. I was very limited in my kind of approaches that I could make and some of the size of the flies that I could fish. But I was able, partially because I was a teenager and didn't have all the money in the world to buy all the fly rods that I wanted to buy, in finding ways to make it work. And I think there is some virtue in that. There's some benefit to that. But by and large, you're not going to be able to do all the things you want to do. If you live in a situation where there's a big sprawling tailwater and then there's tiny mountain creeks, that's kind of when you want to have 2 different rods, or you want to split the difference, but you're not going to have anything that does both perfectly. But if you are going to be fishing a lot of small mountain creeks, then it's ideal to have something in that 7 or 7.5 foot range, maybe a 3-weight or a 4-weight. Because what that will allow you to do is have that smaller profile of the rod tip being, if you're maybe 6 feet tall and that fly rod is 7 feet tall and you're holding it about waist level, you got to think that's, 13 or so feet of circumference around you that rod tip can move. And sometimes that's kind of conservative given what the surrounding environment is for making those casts. But just because the rod is short doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be a good casting tool. And this is why you want to cast your fly rods. You can't just get online and say, 7.5 foot 3-weight, perfect, I can use this for small streams. No, get out and cast it. I would say that even to a greater degree than a long fly rod on a large river, having a casting tool that fits your stroke well matters more on a small stream. Why is that? Because you have to control that back cast really well and control that forward cast, that presentation really well. and you want to make sure that you're able to load that line even at a very short distance, maybe only 6 or 10 feet of fly line out of that rod tip. You want a rod that can load that line well to make that cast. That is to say, remember, when you're casting a fly with a fly rod, you're not casting that fly, you're casting that line. And so you want a rod that has a tip, that has the kind of flex that you're able to pull a very, very small amount of fly line off the water into a back cast, and it generates enough line speed that you're able to make that forward cast and that presentation well. And so I would say go and cast these rods as much as you would cast that 9-foot 5 weight or that 9-foot 6 weight or whatever it is going to be that you're going to have on those larger rivers. And so the small stream fly rod matters a lot, but you can get away with anything. You can get away with using your 9-foot 6 weight. You'll be okay. There's going to be some sacrifices, but you'll be okay. You can use a tenkara rod, and there's going to be some tenkara content coming up here on Casting Across in the next couple of months. But all that to say, the fly rod really, really matters, and they are a lot of fun because there's just something special about having a fly rod that you can use super well in those close confines of these small mountain streams. Beyond that, what are some other things that you need to know? Well, it's important to have good fly line. I've talked about fly line quite a bit, but having a good fly line matters for the exact reasons I mentioned with the rod. You want a line that is going to load well at short distances. So if you can think of a fly line as having a taper to it, starts off skinny, gets fatter, stays fat for a while, gets skinnier again, and then for the vast majority of that fly line, all the way down to where your backing is in your reel, it's going to be thin. Lines that are specifically designed for small streams have one of two different features. One is that they are a double taper line, which is to say that instead of going thin, thick, thin, and then a lot of thin, they go thin, thick, and they stay thick all the way down to the other end of the fly line, and they go thin again. And these are not as popular as they used to be, but the benefit of this is that you kind of know what you're dealing with. It's going to feel the same in a certain sense, whether you have 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet out. Another type of small stream fly line is actually a very compact head. So it goes thin, thick, thin, and then it's a very small, thick section of that front. But this is something to talk to your local fly shop about. It's something that you can look on fly line manufacturers' websites to figure out. But this is a worthwhile expenditure if you're going to be fishing a lot of small streams. It will turn that good fly rod into a great fly rod. It will turn a good caster into a great caster. So rod, line, reel, almost inconsequential. I go back to my fly gear conversation on my other Cast1 series to check that out. But this is also the situation where you're going to be able to do a lot of wet wading because you're not necessarily going to be waist deep in these streams. So to use a pair of old sandals or find a pair of, like I use kayaking shoes, I think they're spectacular, or even just have your wading boots but wearing a sock in them as opposed to a pair of waders is going to provide you with a lot of flexibility. But this is also a situation, and I know I'm kind of bouncing around because we're at the 20-minute mark, but where you can really fish minimalistically. Most of my small stream fly fishing, I either have a tiny pack or I use a backpack with a hydration pack in it, and I have a couple of tools, a couple of spools of tippet, that monofilament that goes on your end of your leader, and then one small box of flies. And over the years, I've refined this box of flies to only having in it the 6 or 7 patterns I like, and enough of those that if I were to have a really good day or a really bad day, I would have enough to keep going. And there's even times where I've had small streams that I'm able to kind of park right next to where all this stuff just goes in my pockets. I don't have anything on my person, and it allows me to move through the brush seamlessly. It allows me to move quickly with not a lot of effort. But ultimately, that is one of the things that I appreciate about this type of fishing. I don't need to carry 7 fly boxes. I don't need to carry every tool that I own. I don't need to have a bunch of bulky gear on my person. It is a very organic and natural way of fishing and being outside. It's as much hiking, it is as much exploring as it is fishing. And you'll find guys that are incredibly accomplished. This is certainly not a self-referent, right? But you'll find a lot of guys that are incredibly accomplished, have fished all over the world, and yet they return over and over again to their mountain brook trout streams, to their mountain cutthroat streams, to those little streams that flow in the valley that they know they could maybe go and catch that 8-inch brown, and they're able to look at that fish with more admiration, more excitement than maybe that enormous trout they caught on their last expedition overseas. So small stream fly fishing is an absolute treasure. It's something that many of us, if we are close enough to the mountains, we have access to with relative consistency. You're not going to have a lot of bad days when you're hiking into the woods, even if you're only catching a few fish. It doesn't mean that it's as easy as I explained. Certainly, there's a lot of nuance, and to really tap into the potential of a stream is going to take some work, some energy and effort, whether that means a lot of fish or that means getting the biggest fish, but it's also an easy access kind of fly fishing. And so although the casting isn't going to be the same sort of casting you see in the commercials and the gear isn't going to be, all the things that you've bought, it is a great way for a new angler to enjoy getting into fish and trying to figure out some of the essential aspects of fly fishing in a very approachable way. Do you have specific questions about small stream fly fishing? Don't hesitate to reach out. Matthew at castingacross.com. There's plenty of articles on the website, and there's also lots of podcasts that deal with different aspects of small stream fly fishing. Because just like I said a minute ago, even though it's an easy thing to get into, there's a lot of complexity once you do, but it's all fun stuff. This week on castingacross.com, 2 articles. One was called Reciprocating Shad. So I figured out that this shad that I caught high up on the East Branch of the Delaware River traveled essentially the exact same mileage that I did to get to that point, from where it entered the river in the Atlantic Ocean and from where I left my home in New Hampshire was basically the same distance. And so I talked about why that shad and I had a lot in common, more than me and a lot of those trout that I caught on that trip. So that's that first article. The next article is called Winners and How You Can Too. So as I mentioned last week, I was giving away 5 copies of Marina Gibson's Cast Catch release. It's her new release and a book that I had the opportunity to read and review before it came out. And so if you want to check out that review, you can check that out. That article is called Cast Catch Release, Wading into Purpose. And then I list not only the winners of that giveaway, but also how you can be automatically entered into most giveaways that I hold on Casting Across. I don't do a lot, but when I do, I like everyone to be automatically entered. Sometimes if somebody says, hey, I want to give these things away, can we do it this way? Then I'll do something different. But by and large, when somebody sends me something, I want to give it to anybody and everybody who reads Casting Across. So all you got to do is subscribe. And a subscription to Casting Across only entails 1 email a week. And you just get an email with both the articles and the podcast topic that came out. And it's certainly not offensive, at least to my sensibilities. This week's recommendation on the podcast is a pair of wading boots. The Corker's Dark Horse wading boots are a wading boot designed for all day, all terrain wading. They are a premium wading boot and they live up to their billing. They have a BOA closure, which is super convenient and comfortable and really easy to replace. If you're like, if that busts down, it's going to be a problem. I actually had the rep from Corker's take one apart and replace it in front of me at a fly fishing show. So it's not that involved. And the stability and the comfort of these boots is top notch. They're the kind of boot that you can wear for an entire week, or if you have stability or foot or ankle or knee issues, these are going to be the kind of boot that you want. They're again, price reflects their quality, but you also get the benefit of having the Corker system, which is interchangeable wading soles. So I have felt, and rubber and studded rubber wading soles that I use in these boots. And they all work great for whatever situation that you find themselves in. So I'll put a link to the Dark Horse wading boots at the bottom of this show's podcast page on Casting Across. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in iTunes and Spotify. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.
A life that has the stories to back it. A life to be proud of. It's a Winchester life.
Yeah, baby. 6'8" Western. Oh, mule deer, baby, right there.
Tune in every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Waypoint TV.